Hello, everyone. My name is Kapsack, for those of you who don't know, and I took a gap year. So I was actually struggling a lot when I was trying to decide what I wanted my topic to be on, and eventually I decided on something I didn't expect. And that being said, I would like, but you don't have to, if you took your watches or time-telling devices and put them under the chairs for the duration of the speech, so you don't get bored. But also it does come back, I promise, I reference that. Okay, so let's just get right into it then. I'll start by saying that it was really weird at first. I remembered surrendering my phone to my program leaders in the Miami airport and feeling a sort of emptiness. Having my phone in my pocket had become sort of a comfort. Feeling the bulge of its frame when I sat down let me know that I still had my connection to the world. Moreover, I had become one of the many people who rely on my phone for pretty much anything. Mine served primarily as a time-telling device, constantly alerting me of the precise time in any given place without even alerting me to a time zone change. I relied on my phone so heavily that I forgot to pack a watch for this trip. Somewhere along the line, I forgot what it felt like to not know what time it was. I had had my phone for years and had been aware of the precise time of day for as long as I could remember. Suddenly not knowing the time began to really bother me. Our orientation in Ecuador was the first real experience I had of not knowing the time. People had watches and iPods though, so I often asked what time it was. But for me personally, time became an abstract concept, and the transition was anything but easy. I would often wake up early in the morning and wonder if I should even get out of bed. Basically, was it light or dark out? And constantly wonder if it was dinner or lunchtime. I began to rely on my stomach, which I soon realized was not a very reliable time-telling device. Then orientation was over, and I was still very much uncomfortable with my newfound concept, or lack thereof, of time, and it was off to the Sachala community. The Sachala community I lived in was largely removed from Ecuadorian society, or at least mainstream Ecuadorian society. They had their own specific indigenous culture, and although they participate in commercial agriculture, they very much keep to themselves. This specific tribe of Sachala people welcome volunteers and students like us to make the world aware of their presence and spread their culture. The family I lived with was amazing, and my host parents, Jorge and Marvel, really taught me so much. Community was so important to them, and as I soon learned, so was their time. Honestly, I thought things would be kind of different. I thought that the conceptualization of time that I had was largely universal. I thought that life basically revolved around specific times for breakfast, lunch, dinner, work, etc. I thought that everyone measured their lives in months, days, years. I was wrong about all that. The Sachala people I lived with did have a concept of time, but it was vastly different than my own. Some of the Sachala did not even measure their age in years, or did not know exactly how old they were. One day an elder would be 45 years old by his own admission, and the next day he would be 60, again by his own admission. Age did not matter. They didn't eat at 6 p.m., but rather when they got home and work was done. Often my host mom would have dinner nearly prepared, but wait until everyone was there to serve. Now to many of us that may sound like a familiar concept, but it was slightly different for them. See, at home, I'm expected to be at home in time for dinner. And if I'm not there, everyone is forced to wait for me. And let's face it, that feels a little bit like shaming. For the Sachala, it was more that they didn't structure dinner around a time, but they wanted to wait until everyone who was important to be there was there. Things were different in this community. There were some days that Kate, my roommate, she actually just walked in, she's right there. My roommate or I would come home later than usual, and our host mother would always make sure that we had dinner waiting for us. If we did not need dinner that night for whatever reason, we'd have to be sure to tell her the day before or the morning of, or everyone wouldn't eat dinner until we got there. And the differences went much further than this. The workday was usually from 8 to 12. And I say that extremely loosely. Timing was not very important, but what you got done in the workday. Some days we would leave the house at 8, other times at 9, depending on what needed to be done, who was picking us up, and sometimes our pickup times even hinged on whether or not the truck picking us up had gas. On days when it rained, the roads would take longer to travel, so our pickup time varied based on that too. I think this is one of the starkest differences between their concept of time and my concept of time. My societal concept of time is one where I try to beat the circumstances to get where I need to go at a specific time. Time seems to trump all. If I was late for work one day and tried to blame it on the weather, that I needed to get gas, my boss would probably say something like, leave earlier or fill it up on your own time. To the Sachala, my concept of time would probably seem as asinine a thing as they have ever heard. Time that I take out of my day to make sure I can be on time the next day is time they would see as wasted. If I was to make sure I had gas in the tank for my commute at the expense of being late for dinner or having less time with my family, they would not understand that. My host dad was home from work largely around early afternoon most days. And the only days he was days when he had meetings with the leaders of the tribe that he had to attend. Even though I was just with him for a brief time, I quickly realized that he would rather be home than at those meetings. His time was most precious spent with his family, and specifically with his son. And that may seem like a bit of an assumption for all of you who don't know him, but believe me, and feel free to ask my fellow travelers, that was the truest statement I've ever made. Now back to me, and back to you. I actually decided I'm not going to do this. Never mind. Back to it. Clock's ticking. My concept of time had been really warped at this point in my trip. I really didn't read into it too much at the time because it played no role in my daily life. I felt a lot like Forrest Gump when he's running in the country in that one scene in the movie. He said, when I was hungry, I ate. When I was tired, I slept. And when I had to, I went. And that's pretty much me. I would wake up, eat breakfast, go to work, eat lunch, go to seminar, go home, eat dinner, go to bed. It didn't really rely on time. Not at all. I worked until work was over, not until a certain time. And if I had a watch, this routine probably would have been impossible. I was going to bed earlier than I ever have in my entire life, usually around 8 or 9, sometimes even 9:30. And I could not have done that if I knew what time it was. Essentially, I went to bed when it got dark and I was tired. And I woke up when it was light and I was awake. This all felt strange, but also natural. Like I tapped into our ancient evolutionary adaptations and completely abandoned the numeral assignment of digits to hours of the day. Of course I hadn't. I would still ask my roommate what time it was in the morning or at night and find comfort in knowing the time. I even set the time on my SanDisk MP3 player, which really wasn't easy, and found comfort in knowing what time it was. I would even look at it sometimes in the morning to decide if I had more time to sleep or not. I was not as far removed from my own concept of time as I would like to have believed. I like to think that I was just removed enough to see the value of the Sachala way that they conceptualize time. It was more socially oriented, more relaxed, less penalizing, and just a little bit more fun than the concept of time I had at home. And as soon as I was about to get into the swing of things, it was time for us to pack up and move on, which kind of became a theme of the trip. And that was hard for me personally because I had really become close to my host family and my roommate. Then it was on to Thailand. Thailand introduced another conceptualization of time, one based on the elements rather than daily life or numerical assignment of hours. Or more accurately, life revolved around the elements, not on any concept of time. The farmers I lived with had a vastly different attitude toward times than the Sachala. As farmers, their livelihoods revolved around the harvest and yield of their farms. They would have to work on their farms throughout the day to ensure the effective cultivation of their land. A 9-to-5 or post-breakfast to pre-dinner workday was made impossible by the heat of northern Thailand. The farmers instead would work throughout the day in intervals of 2 to 3 hours depending on weather. Any day may look like wake up to pre-breakfast, work, breakfast to mid-morning, rest, mid-morning to pre-lunch, work, lunch to mid-afternoon, rest, late afternoon to dinner, work, dinner to bedtime, prepare for work the next day. And that was interchangeable based on the weather of any given day. In fact, the only clock my host parents had was so wrong that my roommate and I, Jake, were unable to figure out how many hours or minutes it was slow or fast. And remember, we were living there for a month and we really tried. They were concerned only with nature. only with the temperature, wind, and intensity of the sun, not its position. A quick aside now, if you will, just to explain the nature of this program for those of you who might not know that much about it. TBB is packed full of activities and work schedules and really just a lot of stuff. That being said, we're still on this trip for 7 months, and we have some downtime. We have a lot of downtime sometimes. Not because we're not working or not learning, it's just sometimes how things happen. Some days would be so full of things to do that I would not even have time to think. Others would be rainy, and all of a sudden I would have no work and be stuck inside all day. It was because of that lack of consistency in time and the amounts of sudden free time that I began to further distance myself from my original conceptualization of time. And our program sort of hinges on time in certain ways. As one of my PLs, Jackie, once said, it would be impossible to do this trip without a watch. It was in Thailand that I began to doubt my own stubborn refusal of her statement and realized that, like with most other things, she was probably right. This program has a lot of seminars and events at certain specific times in order to fit them all in. In Thailand, as I'm sure my PLs will concur, my concept of time began to become very, very relative. I would often be late or not show up at all to events because I did not know when they were or what time I was supposed to be there. And honestly, I have no excuse for that. I had a flip phone, that's hard, that told time, but I entrusted it to my roommate, Jake, who already had a watch of his own. I think I did that because, truthfully, I didn't want to know what time it was. My time had become something precious to me. It had become my time. And what I did with my time was mostly reading and talking to other people, which is instead of doing anything productive, which is in air quotes because I don't really think that reading can ever be fully unproductive. Yes, Thailand may have been a little annoying for everyone who had to deal with my lack of punctuality, but for me, it was very meaningful. But more on that a little bit later. Now, it was on to India, again, after just getting used to the Thai concept of time. In India, I had no time. And as someone who had just figured out to fill all of the downtime I had in Thailand, which was quite a lot, India presented the opposite challenge. Every day was structured, like it is in the United States, around deadlines and timing and activities that you'll miss if you are late. I was so stressed all of a sudden. We had to teach kids at regular hours and times of the day, and we're expected to be there on time, of course. Even our seminar space was an office building, so time kind of functioned linearly there as well. It wasn't easy for me to go from what I knew to what I don't, and then back to what I knew. I mean, shit, I was really finally getting used to it. I stopped reading, or rather tried to read, but couldn't read too much. I would just fall asleep after reading like 5 pages. And my host family, India, was very much like some of the families I knew in the United States. Their time was individual. They ate at different times, never together, and were concerned with time only as it related to them as an individual. And if it sounds like I kind of look down upon that conceptualization of time, it's because after realizing how unfulfilled I felt with that concept of time, I began to. South Africa was interesting as well. They experienced time largely in the same way I did at home, but with important minute differences. I remember learning from a colleague of TBB's that many ways South Africans say now. She explained to us that just now really means a few minutes, and now means actually right now. Now itself really doesn't make sense without a modifier, because that can mean now, or just now, or take a strange third meaning that means whenever. It's in these tiny details that something about South African culture began to become really special to me. The community I lived in functioned largely the same way I was used to at home in the conceptualization of time. The people wore watches in Plettenberg Bay, the beach town near the townships I went to almost every day to get Wi-Fi or food. I had shops with regular hours and people working regular workdays. However, time was conceptualized similarly, but it functioned a little differently. Cabs would leave when they were full, not at any given time, and people would arrive late to appointments almost like clockwork, as if it was the norm. I saw why this happens firsthand when working with Sandra, the community health worker in my township. Sandra is an amazing woman, strong, kind, resilient, and just always smiling from ear to ear, which is a good thing because her job is a hard one. She has to go and see patients at their homes to assist them with taking medication or with their hospice care, or really with whatever ails them. I soon learned that she goes above and beyond even that. Sandra would talk with patients, asking about kids, work, marriages, sometimes gossiping about other patients, and she would talk until the conversation was over, not until she needed to go. As a result, she would often be late visiting the next patient. This kind of prioritizing people over time did not just translate into patient visits. Sandra and everyone else in the township would stop on the street when they saw people they knew walking by and say hello. Then they would go even a little further. They would actually have a conversation with them. I took this for granted at the time because I'd forgotten how I never really conversed with people on the street, even if I know them. A courtesy hello is not even a given, let alone stopping to talk. These people were genuinely interested in each other, and that's something I want to hold on to from them. To be interested in person-to-person interaction instead of obeying my watch or phone to make sure that I get to the next part of my day on time. But I was wondering, is there any way to do this in my life at home? After realizing how other societies look at and interact with time, I was forced to think about what I wanted time to be for me. I like that time revolves around people instead of numbers. That instead of deadlines for dinner or social events, I wait for who's important to be there before I begin. That the elements matter more than the time of day for when I do things. That being said, I recognize the need for the kind of time I used to abide at home. Sometimes I need to schedule things to make sure that I can do them and assign time constraints to certain activities in order for everyone to participate. No way is right or wrong. I think that the way any of us sees or appreciates time is a personal decision and can also change over time. Time can be a largely individual concept. I think that is probably one of the most important things I have learned on this trip. And it was not an easy lesson. Seriously, this gap year has largely taught me, among many other things, how to be bored, or rather, deal with a lot of sudden downtime. How to have a ton of time on my hands and be okay with it. Slowly, I even began to fill that time with things I like to do. Reading is probably the best example I can think of. I used to read a lot. In grade school and then for part of middle school, I always had a book in my hand. Then I got a smartphone, and for some reason, I began to feel like reading was a waste of my time. Can't really go back to the point where this transition happened. It wasn't instantaneous. Unfortunately, I don't think that I had a unique experience in this transition either. It seems to me, the casual, unqualified observer, that many of my peers have experienced the same thing. This trip gave me a chance, even in need, to rediscover my love for reading. And that was a really weird process. My Kindle became my main means of entertainment. It took some time. I was often frustrated with my speed of reading. Truly, I was reading slower than I used to in middle school. And I was really embarrassed by that on a personal level. I know it doesn't equate to intelligence or anything like that, but I felt stupider nonetheless. It took an embarrassingly long time for me to get back into reading. I was often bored after a few pages. I only started reading to make going to bed in Ecuador just a little bit easier, or to fill my time in Thailand. I never even realized that I liked it again until I didn't have the opportunity to read in India. The rediscovery of my love for reading had a profound effect on me. I really had forgotten how much you can get from a book. I forgot that you could learn so much in its pages, imagine such detail through its words, and really become encased in your own world while reading a good book. Unfortunately, the time for me to read unlimited books may have passed. In South Africa, I read the most. I read books and downloaded more in town because we actually had Wi-Fi, which was very rare. And it was really great. My computer was being fixed in South Africa as well, so I didn't have that distraction. I was really surprised when I did get the computer back at how little I actually wanted to watch movies. I mean, of course I did watch some, but I would rather read. I really liked reading more than I liked watching movies. It was more interesting. I guess I just remembered how to create images in my mind. Cheesy, yes, but I think I kind of rediscovered my imagination. Once back in the United States, however, I kind of disappointed myself. I got my phone back and fell into old habits. Quickly, I abandoned my Kindle for the comforts of new apps, games, texts, and social media. Even now, I haven't read in weeks. I know, not a very good role model. That being said, I still view time differently. A little less linearly and a little more fluidly. I'm far from an expert on the subject and basically have no reason to be up here except for the fact that I was literally forced to spend my time differently. Time is so precious of a thing that I still largely take for granted. Moreover, I wondered why it was that time was so suddenly structured for me when it had just a few weeks ago largely been up to me what I do with my time. I thought about this a lot, and I believe I came to an answer. Where we live and in which society we live in no doubt plays a gigantic role in our conceptualization of time. If someone in any given society does not abide time in the way the majority of their society does, they won't fit in. If I were to adopt the Thai way of time I was exposed to, then I probably would be fired, expelled, or what have you, almost immediately after taking my third break of the day. Any conceptualization of time works only if it is in an environment where it's socially plausible. However, excluding societal pressure, I still have the right to spend my time any way I want to. And as I discovered on this gap year, we all have a lot more free time than we really think we do. We just fill that time by being on our smartphones or getting ready for things that we have to do the next day. The compromise of time out of our day to fit in with society versus our desire to spend our time differently seems to have this kind of pro-con or push-pull relationship. And I like that, because this means that although we are all exposed to this pressure, we have the choice to appreciate time as we want to as individuals. So how am I going to do this? In fact, I don't know. I guess I'll try to be a little bit more conscious of how I spend the hours of my day, but I have no disillusions that it may not be possible to experience time in the way I want to right now. I'm going to college next year, and that means I'm going to need money. And in order to get money, I'm going to need a job. And in order to keep that job, I'm probably going to need to be on time most days. Yeah. I'm going to have to subscribe to the kind of monochronic conceptualization of time that I was used to before this trip, or the linear, one-dimensional numerical assignment of time based solely on the sun's position. Maybe in the future I'll be able to change that, but even that's hard to imagine. For the next 4 years, I'll be in college and no doubt be stressed by deadlines and be forced to compromise my time to meet those deadlines. Of course, I will meet most of those deadlines. Don't worry, Mom. However, the conceptualization of time remains something that I can alter in my daily life no matter where I am. Even given the pressures of societal expectations, it's me who has the final decision on how I choose to interact with my time. It is up to me to weigh the pros and cons in this lifelong struggle and decide for myself what I want to do. It's up to me to prioritize people over time, and up to me to decide to read for an hour instead of being on my smartphone. I don't really know what's going to happen in the next couple of years, but I can be thankful that on this gap year, I learned that there are more ways to look at time than just the way that I had my entire life. Anyway, I hope I didn't waste too much of your time with this speech. Thank you very much.
How much time do you need?
More than I have.
What books are you gonna read this summer?
I don't know. No, I mean, I think it's more important that I do read books this summer, not what I read. Hopefully some good ones. My mom said that she's reading a really good book right now, so hopefully I'll read that one. Yeah.
But you see a pattern that there's a difference between rural areas and non-rural?
Yeah, so I mean, we primarily stayed in the rural areas, so that's what I know most about, but it seems to me, because I live in a city at home, I guess I can speak for that. The rural areas are more concerned with time as it relates to their lives, their livelihoods, like farming and their economic activities. In the city, I guess it's also related to economic activities, but that's more structured because cities tend to have, the 9-to-5 office building jobs sort of thing. So I probably should have put that in the speech, that it's kind of based on economics. That's a really good point, actually. Pretend I said that like 10 minutes ago.
I heard that.
Yeah, no, you're definitely right. Yeah.